Holly does represent the part of us that's primordial, that's beneath the domestication, the instinctual or more wild parts of us, that part that maybe knows without thinking, the part that moves without having to get someone's permission to do something, the part that does destroy illusions and cuts through what isn't true, the part that sees the ego and no longer can feed that. The problem with it is that that part is pretty powerful and it can be terrifying. And I think it's the crux of why the patriarchy is a thing, is because there's a threat to being this way. It really does threaten the order of society. One of my deepest commitments is for all of us to become the fullest expression of who we are, to become aligned with our soul, and to have the internal safety and courage and be able to reveal that first to ourselves, to actually get to know ourselves and to learn who we are, and to keep peeling back the layers of who we are, right? Because so often we think this is just who I am. And then if we continue to do this work, we realize actually, I'm more than that. Maybe some of these things have been coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms and masks and armor that I've been wearing. And maybe some of these things over here that I've rejected are actually parts of me that I want to learn more about and integrate into. And we realize that there's more to us than what we thought we were. And that's part of the process. That's part of what it's all about. I don't want to make any of this feel like it's wrong because, at least at this current level of consciousness and evolution, we tend to be born whole and forget about our wholeness and learn how to become somebody that our parents and other people, society, culture need us to be. And that process that happens does cut us off from ourselves. It does. It makes us become who we think we need to be, who we think we should be. And this is identified not just in the reality of probably if you look at your life, this is what happened, but also Carl Jung talks about this. When we talk about first half of life living and second half of life living. And Richard Rohr has taken some of this from Carl Jung's initial ideas around this and even deepened it further. That maybe it's by design. Maybe we have to cultivate a strong ego first. And then when we get a little bit older and we have a little bit more of a sense of agency and power over our lives, and we know ourselves a little bit more, maybe when we have our basic needs met, like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, maybe when we've established community and we have a home, maybe we are able to put food on the table, maybe some of the basic needs are met. So then we're able to reach toward some of these other needs like self-actualization. Perhaps some people will be able to reach self-actualization without going through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But most of us have to have some basic needs met to build a foundation to keep moving up the hierarchy of needs. So that would make sense then that we have to establish this foundation first. But then there's a point in life where we start to get a little antsy, restless, and think, who is this person living my life? Or what is this life I've created? I don't even want this life. It's not even life I like. It's not fulfilling. It's not what I want. And then we might start to go through a little bit of an excavation process, a process of looking and reflecting and making some choices. But ultimately, deep down inside, the journey is really home to ourselves. We can make a million changes on the outside in our lives. And I'm not saying that there aren't some really important changes that sometimes we have to make. But even more importantly, and actually as a step to know which changes would be the best changes to make, really it's to come in and to know thyself. Socrates, I think, said that, know thyself. It's so simple and yet so profound. Now, one of the deepest challenges that we have is that we are in a world that wants to keep us confined, that wants to keep us in a box. always been super hesitant to use this word, but I'm still going to today. Some people would call this the patriarchy. And the way that we live, maybe for I don't know how many years, but I am no expert on this. I'm hesitant to use the word because I don't want to get it into this polarization of people thinking I'm being political or in some social justice camp or not. It's not that at all. There is a thing, which is that we have a bit of a male dominated society and we have for a long time. And I'm going to use the word today, patriarchy, just because it keeps it simple. I've been listening to a book called The Power of the Crone. It's by Clarissa Pinkola Estés, and I have loved her. She has been such a gift to me, walking side by side in my own journey. The first book I read of hers was Women Who Run with the Wolves. And she's an incredible storyteller. And I highly recommend that if you want to listen to her and drink her in, that you consider listening on Audible because it's more. There's so much more when she's sharing these stories. I could share so many stories with you. I love some of the stories she shared, but instead, I won't even rob you from it. I'll just encourage you to listen to her because it's breathtaking. So back to what I was saying is that what we might call the patriarchy, you can call societal structures, you can call culture. And she calls it culture mother, I think. This idea that we get raised in a culture by this mother that we don't even see. It's almost invisible to us. And it's saying these are the ways to be, and these are not the ways to be. And even if your parents give you more space to be your whole self, which oftentimes we didn't experience that, but let's just even imagine into the possibility that our parents give us that much spaciousness to really be our truest selves, and they don't try to fit us into little palatable boxes. Culture still is parenting us. And this is part of what gets us limited. So, in the whole soul way, we are really striving to reclaim access to our truest selves, right? Reclaim all these exiled and abandoned parts and places and pieces where we pushed away and we've hidden and we've locked up because maybe, again, either parents or culture mother has said, no, that's not okay. You can't be that way. And what ends up happening is we live this fragmented, divided life, this sense that we're disconnected, maybe from our hearts. We are intellectualizing and analyzing and thinking our way through lives while our heart is screaming out for attention because really, in many ways, it's desiring to feel its way through life. And the soul is desiring for us to be aligned and to be following its guidance. But instead, we're kind of up in our heads. And we're living out these protective patterns, not living in the most present moment, not fully alive. And even if you consider yourself to be an emotional person, I want you to consider the possibility that there's other ways that you are following rules. And we're talking about rules that you may not even know have been imprinted into you. Maybe you became the good girl, or you decided that you would be more reserved and controlled because maybe you were a little bit more wild and rambunctious, and you learned that that wasn't really an okay way to be, especially as a good girl. Maybe you're a little buttoned up and you don't even know why. You've got like a little bit of this kind of tentative place. Maybe like when you dance, you're afraid to be fully free. And there's a little bit of this constrictedness inside of you, and you're not even sure where that came from. You might even look back and say, I used to be more free. And maybe there are these messy parts of you that you have kept hidden. And that is oftentimes partially because of the way we were raised in our family of origin, partially because of culture and the patriarchy and the seas that we swim in. And my own opinion of this is that as social media has become so much part of our lives, it's only gotten worse, even though there's been such a movement toward women's rights and dismantling the patriarchy and honoring and acknowledging the absolute magnificence of women. There's still a way it's just there. It's omnipresent for us. And we have to really be paying attention and watching all of the ways that we're getting these subtle messages and maybe not so subtle messages, even in the TV shows we watch, even in the things that we read, social media posts. And because each of us doesn't always fully know the ways that we have been brought into this system, we might not even know that we're doing it. Even the people who are doing the most work on this and the most conscientious about it, there's blind spots. So we really have to own it for ourselves. Not to mention the fact that one person's idea of dismantling the patriarchy might look incredibly different than another's. And I would definitely say that's true for me. I am definitely much more of a wholeness person where I look at the patriarchy as an imbalance and that it's not about rejecting the masculine. It's not even about rejecting the toxic masculine in the sense of we need to look at it. We need to acknowledge that there is toxicity that exists and ways that we all can behave that are out of balance that can be harmful. That's for women and for men. It doesn't matter. That's in the masculine energies and the feminine energies. It doesn't make a difference. So I'm more about the expansion of the wholeness and to collect the parts of humanity that had to be pushed aside in order for patriarchal structures to persist. And any culture structures that limit us from being our fullest expression. I would say religious structures totally do this. And yeah, our religious structure is patriarchal? Yes. But there's another layer that happens in the religious structures. So the other thing I want to just call out is it's also ways that we are afraid will be criticized for. There, maybe if we're a little too flirty or wild, like maybe other women are going to judge us and they're going to not want to be with us. We're going to feel a little bit on the outside. So there's a lot of risk in choosing to do something outside of the structures that we've all been unconsciously taught, the sea, the culture sea that we swim in and that we don't even know we're in. I want to read something to you. So you can't make this stuff up. This morning, I opened up this book and I don't even read it every day right now. I opened this book up to November 12th. I'm planning on talking to you about this. And here is the most perfect thing to share with you. Okay? And you'll understand more and more as I continue to share today. Oh, the book I'm talking about is The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. Okay. It's a daily book, where every day it has a little something. So on November 12th, that is the day I'm recording today, burning the wrapper. I won't read it all to you. But I'll read enough to hopefully give you a little sense of where we're going with this. So the Polynesians say that the world began when Teora, the name of their creator, woke to find himself growing inside a shell. Does that sound familiar? We're kind of all a little bit in this shell, this protective shell. He stretched and broke the shell, and the earth was created. Teora kept growing, though, and after a time he found himself inside another shell. Again, he stretched and broke the shell, and this time the moon was created. Again, Teora kept growing, and again he found himself contained by yet another shell. This time, breaking forth, he created the stars. In this ancient story, Polynesians have carried for us the wisdom that we each grow in this life by breaking successive shells, that the peace of God within us stretches until there is no room to be, and then the world as we know it must be broken so that we can be born anew. In this way, life becomes a living of who we are until that form of self can no longer hold us. And like Teora and his shell, we must break the forms that contain us in order to birth our way into the next self. This is how we shed our many ways of seeing the world. Not that any are false, but that each serves its purpose for a time until we grow and they no longer serve us. And I would just say, I know for me that I have lived through many, many selves. I have definitely been one who keeps on finding a new layer, a new shell, a new place where I feel like I am full, I'm expanded to the point where I can no longer be this small, this contained. And then I have to bravely stretch beyond that, beyond my comfort zone, beyond that which has been familiar to me, and be willing to bring forth more of me, to burst into more of God, the God me, the divine me, that is the authentic me, the truest me. And I think that we can't do this without understanding how the structures that we are swimming in confine us. But I also think that we can't do this without talking about some stories. And the one story I want to talk about right now, I have absolutely loved learning about goddesses. You may not know that about me. A lot of people don't know that about me because honestly, so much of what I've been doing has been healing and trying to make healing accessible for people. And sometimes I forget to say some of the other things I do. And so I've been trying to bring forth more of this with my community, with people that I know. And so I have deeply enjoyed over the years studying under women who bring in goddess energy. And I really believe that this is an incredibly important component because these stories, these feminine goddess stories, they have been part of our lineage. And it helps to remember who we are, how powerful we are, and to not get so confined by the more masculine, dominant, patriarchal structures that have had us in a shell. And I would say that would be many layers of shells as well. And not only are we cut off from our heads, but we're cut off oftentimes from our bodies. I will speak for me. I had trauma that cut me off from my body. And I think a lot of women, it's not even necessarily something that they would call trauma, meaning that it could have been a series of times when their body wasn't honored, where in some way they had to cut off from themselves in order to be loved or be accepted. And this happens also through the objectification of our body, the way that another person feels that our body is theirs to watch and theirs to covet, to touch, to experience. And we lose that sense that our body is our body. And because of that, in some ways, to feel like we can be in this world, we have to cut off from parts of our body. Even if we don't feel fully cut off, I'd invite you to consider the possibility that there's some way that you might be cut off from your body. And we also are cut off from something even more deep. We're cut off from the more undefined primordial aspects of ourselves, the part that was us before we were tamed by culture and by society, the parts that are uniquely us, not always predictable, not fitting into a box, maybe a little bit even chaotic. These aspects of ourselves that are true and real. And they're true and real for men too, by the way. But everybody has had this conditioned out of us. So sometimes we don't even know who we are. And part of the reason why we don't know who we are is because we got taught that we can't trust our own instincts. We can't trust who we are. As children, for example, that no, you need to behave in certain ways because if you were left to your own devices, you would be too wild, too feral, too much. Now, I wanted to say something. I don't even know for sure that that's not just okay. This goes back to the question of, do we have to be raised in some ways to be fitting into a society and to be participating in certain ways? I don't really know. I'm not even really caring that much because here we are, and the women I work with aren't young children. They are parents. And so I think there is some discussion of how do we raise our children? How do we allow them to unfold rather than trying to mold them as much as we often do? And I think it's something to watch for sure. But do I think that there's no conditioning that's important at all? Well, I wanted my children to be able to participate in society, to be able to be a good friend. And so, to some degree, I think a little bit of conditioning probably is important, but I call it conscious conditioning, really being thoughtful about how we're conditioning our children. Because here we are trying to unhook from all of this conditioning and trying to find our truest selves. And it's hard work, but maybe that's just part of life. Maybe that's just the way it is. So, I'm not here suggesting that we want to raise untamed, feral children who just like free range, do whatever they want to do. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I do think that bringing a little bit of balance in would be good, not just you shall fit into this acceptable structure of who you should be, and any part of you that is a freer spirit or maybe is a little more unpredictable or unpinnable or wild, that you shall box that up and put that away. No, I think there's a balance to all of this. And I think when you live in a more patriarchal society, I think what happens is that the dominant culture does sort of set the rules and is threatened by anyone who doesn't fit into that box. And the masculine energy does tend to be a little more linear, a little bit more predictable, and a little more structured. And a lot of women have developed a more powerful and maybe even overly developed sense of the masculine energy within us, and oftentimes the feminine, which gets defined as a little bit more chaotic and unpredictable and maybe a little more wild and sensual. Some things, they can be a little scary. Those parts of ourselves have been put on a shelf and put away. So let's talk about Kali Ma. In Hindu mythology, there's a goddess named Kali Ma. We're going to call her Kali. And her story has always been both a little terrifying for me and so exciting. Now, one thing I want to make sure you're clear on is I am no expert in goddesses and storytelling. I'm not. I'm just dipping my toe into this right here. But I have personally benefited so much that I want to share these stories. But the most important thing for you to remember is that when you listen to mythology and storytelling, it's more about where does that story touch you? Where can you find yourself in that story? I'm going to just tell you the story first, and then we'll go into it a little bit more. The world was under siege by a demon. He had terrifying power, and every time a drop of his blood would hit the ground, a new demon would spring forth, and it was getting out of control. And the gods were desperate to get this enemy contained. Okay. So the warrior goddess Durga, fierce and powerful, with 10 arms carrying weapons, called forth something even more primal. In a moment of pure, unbridled rage, Kali burst forth through Durga's forehead, this wild, untamed, and absolutely free Kali. Now, Kali is everything that society tells us not to be. She was dark and chaotic and unpredictable. She was wild with untamed hair. She did not care what anyone else thought. She didn't try to be palatable or acceptable or appropriate. None of it. But she did what no one else could do. She drank every drop of the demon's blood before it could hit the ground. She devoured the demons whole, and she saved the world by being exactly what she was. She brought balance into the out of control, masculine, dominant, powerful way of being. She brought in this feminine energy. She brought in exactly who she was. Okay. Now, here's what gets really interesting about the story, though, because I don't know about you, but this goes back to the part of me that kind of wonders, like, I don't know that I really want us to just be completely swinging the pendulum the other way, and that the feminine energy becomes dominant. And then we have this like wild, untamed, feral way of being. I'm not even saying that that's what would happen. I'm just trying to call out the possibility that some of this is in your mind as well. Then the story where it gets really interesting is that after the battle was won, Kali didn't stop. She kept this dance of destruction. And she was really becoming more and more frenzied in some ways. And the gods became afraid now, not so much of the demons anymore, but of her. She had this unbridled power. She was untamable, and the earth trembled beneath her feet. So she had a consort, Shiva. And at one point, he lay down in her path. And when Kali realized that she was standing on him, when she saw what her wild dance was doing, she finally stilled. Okay, stilled. Let's just be really clear on that. She didn't disappear. She didn't become domesticated and stop being the way she was. She simply paused and became aware and found a balance between her wild nature and this conscious choice of choosing whether she was going to be that way or not, this masculine and feminine balance. Because ultimately, it really isn't about becoming wild and reckless and out of control, but to find a balance. That's what the wholeness is about. It's not about that the feminine or the masculine is better. So the problem is that most of us don't even know anything beyond our appropriate, acceptable, and palatable selves. Don Miguel Ruiz talks about domestication in his book, The Four Agreements. We get domesticated, like this is how you have to be in order to be able to be in this world. And then when we only know that, then we are showing up from this limited and constricted place. So, yes, Kali does represent the part of us that's primordial, that's beneath the domestication, the instinctual or more wild parts of us, that part that maybe knows without thinking, the part that moves without having to get someone's permission to do something, the part that does destroy illusions and cuts through what isn't true, the part that sees the ego and no longer can feed that. The problem with it is that that part is pretty powerful and it can be terrifying. And I think it's the crux of why the patriarchy is a thing, is because there's a threat to being this way. It really does threaten the order of society. There is a part of us that I don't want us to forget about. The part that wants what it wants, that moves toward it because it just knows that's what it wants. The part that doesn't let fear and roles and conditioning keep us from the things that we want. Think about maybe as a child when you just wanted to do something. Say you wanted to climb the monkey bars. You didn't think, I'm a girl, so I can't do that. You just did what your body did. You just expressed and you were being. Now, there might have been someone who said, girls don't climb on monkey bars. And then now all of a sudden you don't climb on monkey bars anymore and you don't even know when you stopped. So wild is just unconditioned. Wild is just being your full, true self without all the layers of shoulds and supposed tos that got piled onto you. I think that wild is uninhibited, right? It's not allowing all that conditioning, programming, societal roles and rules dictating how we show up in the world. But I think that it's always going to be about wholeness and a choice. But most of us, we learned how to be incredibly tamed, conditioned, controlled, locking away any part of us that is unpredictable, maybe not palatable, or we believe isn't palatable. So, just to be clear, though, that I think that what I read in the Book of Awakening is important to remember that this isn't a thing that happens immediately. This is something that happens in layers. And to me, this is a slow unfolding of who we are and a becoming, really. And it's removing layers, it's breaking out of those shells. And it only happens according to your own level of safety internally, your nervous system's regulation, the capacity you have. I think if you trust your soul's guidance on this, then yes, you might get pushed a little bit outside of your comfort zone at times, and you might take action that proves to yourself that you're willing to do something different. But I don't think you have to do anything that you don't want to do. That's important to note here. I know for me, there have been several really big times in my life where I had to do something way outside of my comfort zone that maybe for you wouldn't be outside of your comfort zone. Like, I remember that when I was in my life coach training program, they danced at lunch, and I was so buttoned up and reserved. I was like, I don't dance. Nope, I don't dance unless I've been out and had a couple drinks. I don't dance. All these people are dancing, and not just dancing, they were dancing like wild, feral people. They just were dancing so freely. And I was so threatened by that. But there was more to it that I didn't even know. So the first thing that happened was I finally got brave enough to leave the bathroom during lunch and to go in and start to be on the sidelines, just moving my body and then slowly getting a little more brave, moving more of my body. And that was huge for me as a person who was as reserved as I was. That was a really hard thing for me to do. And especially being around so many people who were so free to be themselves, it was really hard because it was pushing up against the shell that I had and making me question my shell and not really know where to go with that. Then there was this other thing that happened. When I started dancing, I realized I could not put my hand above my head. My hands above my head. I couldn't do it. I had this invisible limitation right here that just couldn't do it. So I finally told somebody there. And because I was around a bunch of life coaches, I get a lot of support for it. And so one day we decided that I was going to do it. And you can't believe it. Like, there's nothing there. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to do that. But I had had an experience as a child that caused me to want to keep my arms closer to my body to protect myself. So one day I put my arms above my head and it was so freeing. I was crying and people were cheering me on, and it was this huge thing that you wouldn't think is a big deal. But that's why I always encourage people to notice that these are not necessarily big things. This is not necessarily, I'm going to get a divorce or I'm leaving my job. Mostly the breaking out of our shell are a ton of micro moments that we choose to do something slightly different than we were before because we felt that the shell we were in didn't fit anymore. But remember, just like the butterfly or any other transformation, transformation isn't always easy. You have to do something about it. You have to take a new step. You have to be willing to turn inward, feel into what it is that you're ready for, even if one part of you is like, we are not ready for this. Because let me tell you, there was a part of me that never wanted to put my hands above my head. But then there was another part of me that was like, but I kind of want to. And we have to be willing to be brave and sometimes look fear in the eye and say, I know you're scared. I know you don't want to do this, but we're going to do it. We're going to give it a try. I know we're safe right here. We're going to give it a try. But that's why I teach in the Wholesome Way the importance of building the safety, of knowing how to reparent ourselves and to love ourselves and be with ourselves and to recognize the difference between a protector part and the soul's invitation to be more aligned and to expand, right? Okay, so I wanted to share another little bit, which is from these cards that I've really enjoyed. This is the Divine Feminine. I have many of these. They're like an oracle card. So I pull a card and then I read about it. Well, I pulled up the Kali Ma card, the Mother of the Universe. Okay. I release all that doesn't serve me. It is time to be the truth of who I am. I want to just read a little bit about this, okay? It's the same story, but it's a little abridged. Kali embodies the ultimate wake up call to get us aligned as soon as possible with that which we came here to do. The Hindu goddess is the most fierce form of the dark divine feminine. She is that which brings all things to life or to an end. Her name comes from the Sanskrit word meaning the fullness of time. Kali is first mentioned in the 6th century when the goddess Durga is threatened by two demons, and Kali emerges from the rage furrowed in the Durga's forehead and slays all the demons with ease. This is why she's often pictured holding the severed head of a demon, which represents the ego or the false beliefs and illusions. She appears wrathful, and yet she's considered to be the most loving. She's like a mother desperate to grab her beloved child out of harm's way, willing to yank them from the path that they're on in order to bestow freedom. And this is where they talk about that we have the Hindu god of Shiva, and that together they represent the power available to us when we've honored both the masculine and the feminine. And as I said before, Kali is the feminine that gets called upon when the masculine has gone out of balance within us and in the world. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. I think many of us probably would argue that we have a stronger masculine. Even if you're a very emotional person, I think we have to be really careful to note that this doesn't mean that you are masculine. It just might be that you have an overdeveloped sense of doing, of productivity, of your worth being connected to what you do, of structure and order and control. And maybe we just need a little bit more feminine, a little Kali in our lives. So Kali is the divine protectress and the mother of the universe because she can cut through illusion and grant us the reality our soul came to manifest. So cool. The funny thing is that Kali, as Megan Watterson says here, Kali is as subtle as a sledgehammer. She shows up to strip what no longer serves us. And that's all good in theory, but we all know that it also can feel like the ground is shifting beneath us, and maybe we have nothing to stand on. And that's because the structures of culture, of society, they have provided us a sense of stability, a sense of something we know with certainty. We all agree to this, even if we don't consciously agree to it. In some ways, we've all agreed to this is the way that it's going to be. And in some ways, I think a lot of us can feel threatened, like I did when I was dancing, by people who aren't following those rules. It feels, there's like a level of uncertainty and instability that it brings up inside of us. So let's see. Kali doesn't want us to waste another precious second being someone that we are not. She wants to sever the ties our ego has made out of fear or out of false beliefs that we don't deserve better or more. She wants us to get terrifyingly real, to reckon with the fact that we are not here to please others or to make them proud. We are here to listen to the singular call of our own soul. She is the harbinger of having entered Kairos, soul time. And stripping the ego to reveal the soul can feel raw and often heartbreaking. But ultimately, Kali has come out of fierce love for the truth of who we really are. That's why I love Kali so much, because I really believe that too. She's giving us the opportunity to choose again, to start over, and this time from a place of tremendous wisdom and strength, our vulnerability. So this is where we begin again from the bare bones truth of who we are. And again, this is a journey. This isn't a one and done. I mean, guess some people might wake up and just bust through all the shells, but I think it's something that you can take at whatever pace is right for you. So the soul voice meditation that she brings into this book is, what is falling away from my life right now that no longer serves me? The intention is I release all that doesn't serve me. It is time to be the truth of who I am. So anyone who's on the whole soul way journey probably already knows that's a lot of what we're doing is becoming the truth of who we are and bravely stepping into that. But in order to do that, we do have to build internal safety and security, become the source. So she talks about that we're not here to please others or to make others proud. But when that has been the source of our security, stability, that's how we get love. That's how we feel safe in the world. It's not easy to just say, we're just going to rip that away, right? It takes time and patience. So here, just one more time, the beautiful Kali. Ooh, the scary, beautiful Kali. I have always thought Kali was green and Kali's blue here. And so I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay, so let's take off these glasses because I'm not needing to read, but let's talk just a little bit about the feminine and the patriarchal container that we have been kind of locked in. Okay. So, as we've talked about, this is connected to the feminine and the threat that the feminine has really brought up in people. But let's just talk about the feminine energy for a moment that exists in all of us. Let's just be clear. Like you might call this the archetypal energy of the feminine. Okay. It is actually fluid, not fixed. So you can already hear me saying the opposite is the masculine energy, right? It's cyclical, like our cycles for our menstruation. It's not linear. It's a little more chaotic, not ordered, wild, not domesticated, free flowing rather than being contained, intuitive, not rational, embodied, not intellectualized. I just want to say something though. I think a lot of women take offense to use these words to describe the feminine. I'm not describing you per se. I'm just talking about energies that are within all of us. But I think what's really important is that even the fact that we have a cringe around these words is because of what we have learned through the patriarchal thinking, is that these ways of being are bad. They're not desirable. They're they're insulting. Okay. But I also want to be clear that neither one, the masculine or the feminine, are more important. That it really is about the balance. It's about the Shiva and the Kali coming together because the masculine has its place. The structure, action, decisiveness, consciousness, we need it. But when you have suppressed the feminine, as we have as a society, as a culture, and it's been controlled and contained for so long, and we've lost access to half of who we are, we must do the work to reclaim this other part of ourselves so that we can come into wholeness. So these energies can dance together rather than one or the other. So we can be in choice rather than feel that we have to be a certain way. And I'll say this again, and I feel like to some degree, what we feel is that we can't fully trust ourselves, that we need boundaries to keep ourselves in line. That is probably what we learned, that if we were allowed to be free, that we would be destructive like Kali Ma. And that we would probably lose love and approval of other people, which is probably what happened when we were kids. We probably did lose approval of our parents or teachers or other people when we acted outside of those domestication rules. But here's the thing, when Kali stepped on Shiva, she didn't destroy him, she didn't dominate him, she just became aware. She coexisted with Shiva. That's the lesson here, is it's the integration. It's not domination. And I think that's the problem with the patriarchy is has been this idea of a dominating force. And that's why I'm not a fan and advocating for a matriarchy, because I don't believe any one energy should be the ruling energy. I don't think that dominance is what we're looking for. I think integration and coming together in wholeness is what we're really striving for. So I love this metaphor that my friend Christopher exposed me to, which is the idea that the masculine is the banks and the feminine is the flow of a river. So you've got the banks, which are some structure, some value based, my own value based structures. What's important to me? Where do I want to guide my life? And putting some structure around that, some intentionality around that. But that allows me to then flow the feminine of me through my life. Now, this isn't some externally imposed idea of what the banks are. It's still my choice. What banks do I want in place in my life so I can have the masculine containment and structure? But within that container, I am free to flow, to be wild, untamed, and move myself through, following my intuition, being unpinnable, able to not be controlled. But again, within some of these Thanks. It reminds me of parenting. I feel like it's a similar thing that, we want to give our kids some boundaries because it gives them a sense of feeling a little bit of containment. Like imagine the words you might say if you were the masculine energy of, you matter to me so much that I want to keep you a little contained so you can feel the love of my arms around you when you get a little too far here and there. But I want them to be wide enough that you can be free to follow those instincts, to be more fluid, to sometimes be a little more wild, but knowing that I provide the containment, the box, the limits, a little bit of these boundaries, and then I will continue to expand them for you as you get older so that you can find your own way more and more as you're ready to. That's the healthy masculine dance with the feminine. Because if we have a structure that's expansive enough, the river, so to speak, can flow and also be contained without feeling controlled or dominated. But here's the thing, the patriarchal structures that we live in, they fear that balance. They do. They fear that balance. And they fear even us having enough information, even us to feel that we can make a choice. There's a belief or a desire to have top down power structures that not just we, women, but even men are subjected to. Because in patriarchal structures, here's the thing, not all men have that power. Usually, what it is, it's contained. And by the way, it's not just men, it's women who are showing up in compliance with the patriarchal structures. There's a small percentage of people, maybe 5%, who have the power and who are dominating the social constructs, the culture of society. And the rest of us are subjected or subjugated to that. And I said it's not just women because here's the thing, many, many men, most men, even the ones in the power position, probably especially the ones in the power position, have also been cut off from themselves. They've been boxed in too. They have their own set of rules, which we're not even going to get into here. And so there's a freedom with men that needs to be invited too, because men have their own prescribed rules and roles that limit them. Now, I'm going to say that I think that to some degree, women probably suffer more palpably and are really feeling this sense that the shell of the patriarchy got too freaking confining, too limiting, too restrictive, too controlling. And that's why there are so many women who are busting free from it. And that's why women, in many ways, are taking the lead in creating these changes. But I think all people in this world, in our society, I'll say, speak for in Western society, are craving to be busted free from this. I mean, I say Western society, but geesh, there are cultures that are way worse than us. If you really compare us, you could say, wow, we have a lot of freedom. Like women have a lot of freedom here. I always look at something as progress is really important. So, like, are we making progress? Yes. And that makes me feel some strong relief. I don't know that we could just like that dismantle patriarchy and then be okay. I think our nervous systems would freak the F out if we did. So, I do think it's okay that this is happening in somewhat of a, I don't know, methodical pace. I'm not even sure. I think some people would want this to happen right away. And I get the concept of that because I kind of do, but at the same time, I think that it would be a little too much for everybody and we wouldn't even know what to do with ourselves. But I also don't ever want to say, oh, well, we're better than them, so therefore that's good. I want to be dissatisfied with the limitations and I want to be free to be myself. But I want to be really clear on something. I do not think that the only way to change this is by changing the structures and trying to change policy and everything outside. I think that there's this massive power we have as individuals to reclaim access to our whole selves, our feminine and masculine energies, to expand into who we are and to free ourselves from these structures in our head. These oppressive structures, these dominant structures exist, no question. We ought to be very aware of the ways that these systems are playing a part in our lives. But for many of us, we are not going to go out and do those other things. And that, like, for example, trying to change the outside structures. What we will do is we will change it from the inside out. We will become a person who is in our wholeness, who stands in our more full power, who reclaims access to half of ourselves that we have been cut off from, and bring it in. And the more we do that, that has ripples out to the world. It's literally, we are the world. We are. Who we be matters. How we show up in our relationships changes other people. When we show up in our wholeness, we give permission. A lot of people that I see, and listen, I'm not throwing shade on people who are out there trying to make changes, but I see people who are out there trying to make changes in the outside world, trying to change the systems and the structures, but they haven't really reclaimed access to their own internal feminine. They're still, in some ways, are living out a more dominant way. They're trying to dominate those structures and dominate men to tell them, you need to do it this way. It's kind of like taking the patriarchy and filtering it in a distorted way of trying to have women's rights and then impose that onto people instead of becoming it, living it, being a living, becoming being of balance and of wholeness of the masculine and the feminine. That's the freaking beauty. And that's why this work, yeah, you're doing your inner work so that you can make your life better, no doubt, so that you can balance out your relationships, so that you can feel more inner peace, you can feel healed and whole from your childhood, and you're changing the world. You are. You're literally changing the world. I want you to wonder into how you have agreed to this. And the flip side of that is, have you decided to no longer agree to it? Because back to the part about who we be inside, when we internalize all these external structures, we become our own jailers. We start policing ourselves. Nobody's even watching and we're policing ourselves. We've learned to control ourselves to fit into these culture mother structures, this patriarchy structures, control ourselves. They don't even have to do the work. We do it to ourselves. It's insidious. We get so good at being good, at following the rules, at being the person that is acceptable. So the work is in, first and foremost, are you willing to look at the ways that you are perpetuating this thinking in your own life, the way you are controlling yourself, dominating yourself, fixing yourself to fit some idea of who you should be, not trusting yourself, containing who you really are. And how much do you not even know? Because that's the insidious part of it all, is that we don't even know it until we start to say, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be me. I want to be living aligned with my soul's greatest expression. I don't want all these limitations imposed upon me anymore. And we start to notice little places, maybe in our marriage, maybe with friendships, where we do things where we're people pleasing instead of speaking. I wouldn't even say speaking our truth, knowing our truth. Where maybe our husband comes over and grabs our butt while we're doing laundry. And it used to feel kind of cute, and now it feels a little icky. And we're like, I don't really want you to do that anymore. But some part of us feels like, well, but we've been doing it all along. I've been going along with it. How can I change things now? You can change things now, sister. You can change things now. Yeah, it's true. My husband literally has said to me before, like, but you're kind of changing the rules on things. Like, we were always this way and now you're this way. Yep. Guess what? And to some degree, that is the feminine, right? It's like, yeah, look at me. Oh, I'm so unpredictable now. And my husband has had to, in some ways, I think there was a part of him that always knew that there's this wilder part of me. Because I think that actually there is, like, that's part of the feminine. That's part of the juiciness of the feminine. And so there's a part of all of us that know it's there. And we have this like, oh, it's kind of exciting, but it's also threatening in some ways. So we kind of feel it and don't. And I always had this part that knew that I was more expansive and a little more wild and untamed. And yet I also knew that the rules of my family and the rules of society, like I wanted to be good, I wanted to fit in. And so I did box myself in, but I had this tension always in me. And I wonder, do you have that tension too, or is that just me? Because I do have this tension of something more, but then the safer place is to not do that. And so it does take some courage. Let's just not discount that it does take a lot of courage. And it does mean that relationships and patterns will get dismantled. Things will have to change. And that means that we have to be brave. And by the way, they're not going to necessarily go along with it. Just, oh, I'm happy to change. Like this has been 15 years of me changing and my husband resisting and then finally kind of getting on board, kicking and screaming, and then, moving. And now we're 15 years into this, married for 24 years. And I finally feel like he's really, really understanding and actually kind of likes it. I think there's this way that it is threatening, but there's also this beauty of he doesn't really know who he's going to get. He doesn't really know what I'm going to think. I change my mind. I have certain things I'm very predictable on, and then certain things that yeah, like I wouldn't make those plans because I don't know if I'm going to want to do that. And I think there's something exciting about that. It's something different. And I invite us all to tap into the freedom to be that way. And by the way, just to be super clear, I give him that freedom too. It's funny. I was at a dinner recently and I said how my husband was more of a kind of person who was just happy with what I wanted. Some people could call that a people pleaser. I don't know that my husband would call himself a people pleaser in general. I don't really think he would, but he just wanted to make me happy and to not make me unhappy. And she said, well, why is that so bad? Isn't that such a great thing? And I said, well, I guess, but I didn't know really if it was coming from his most authentic self or if it was really coming more from his rules that he was following that, like, happy wife, happy life, just don't rock the boat, don't upset her, just try to make sure she's okay and not get too upset, and I thought that's where it was coming from. And so for me, I would much rather him bust free too, but it's taken me time for that because I can remember a time when I was in therapy, probably 14 years ago. I remember in my mind, I said to myself, I don't think I can handle his truth. I don't think I could handle him telling me what he really thinks and feels right now. And there I was bearing all of my bleh, like my truth, which was really not even truth, which was more like me barfing on him about everything that I was unhappy about and resentful about in our marriage. But I don't think I could have handled that from him. Now I can handle his truth that's ego truth and his whole truth, his deepest truth. But I couldn't handle it before. So I didn't want that. But now, what do I want? I want him to be him. I want him to unleash his true kind of wild self. Balanced, balanced, right? Not the wild self that feels that he can just go do whatever he wants and super destructive. But where is a little bit of that? Where's his like, yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, 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 yes to all of this. So, how can we use the Kali story to really inspire ourselves? I think that we can ask ourselves questions. What do we want more of in our lives? I think that it's a very interesting question. Where are we feeling limited? Can I trust myself to lean into my own internal impulses and to act on them rather than doing what I should do or I'm supposed to do or I've always done or the rules say I should do or the roles tell me I should do or my responsibilities tell me I should do? It's moving away from those roles, rules, and responsibility to real. And maybe some people would even say raw, but I would just say real, to be the real you in any given moment. How do we start to do this? Well, we start to do this just by even exploring what are my feelings and my thoughts and my needs and my preferences and my opinions. What are they? So many of us haven't even considered that. We're so worried about making sure that the kids are okay and our husband's okay and that we kind of centered our life around them. Because, by the way, that's another key thing for women, even working women. I can almost understand it for the stay-at-home mom, which, by the way, I was for many years. I can almost understand it there because it's like, okay, well, you find yourself in these like traditional roles and you're taking care of the family and he's taking care of the outside stuff and the money. And maybe there's this way that you center your life around him because, everybody knows money is so important. By the way, it is. I'm not discounting that, but not more than your humanity, not more than your wholeness. But that it can happen. But it even happens with people who are both working, or even she's working and he's at home. It happens. It's just so easy for us to get sucked into these ways where we center our lives around his life. Even you have a career, but his career is more important. Your family's there and you don't really want to leave your family, but it's his career. So we have to. And I'm not even saying that there aren't some practical reasons why that's true. I'm just saying there's more to it than that. How about if we just expand the conversation? Even if we still do the thing, we still move because of his job or something. That's okay. Can we expand the conversation that you matter too? I'm on my soapbox. In that process that we talk about of, I'd say, controlling us, but of domesticating, socialization, all of that process, we lose touch with just too much. We really do. We lose touch with too much. We lose touch with our aliveness, like that felt sense of being fully present in our body. It takes us away from it. We learned that trusting our body and our gut sense isn't okay. You just have to follow the rules, girl. I would say that's not just our aliveness, it's our instincts, the body wisdom, the intelligence that's beneath, below the neck. I think sometimes we lose touch with the creative fire, that maybe like uncontained energy inside of us that births new things. Some people are super creative, and that can even be the beginning of waking something up in us like, wait a second, there's so much more to me than this. I think we lose touch with our fullest expression. And I don't just mean the words, I mean like movement, sensuality, touch, like a sense of we are more. Even things like how we want to do our hair. Maybe we always have long hair because you're supposed to have long hair or you're supposed to dress a certain way, but you really just feel this urge to bust free from that and do it differently. I think that we lose touch with our yeses and our nos. I do. I think we lose touch with our yeses and nos. We often just kind of go along with things. We say, I don't have a preference. I have not had a preference too. And there are times when I don't. I tend to be a somewhat flexible person, but I used to revere that about myself, that I was flexible, I didn't have needs, and all these other people, they're so high maintenance. So I'll just go along with them. And that's because I had a shadow part around being high maintenance. And now I own that sometimes I'm a little high maintenance and I have things I want and specific things. I remember I used to want to order specific things off the menu, but I'd be really careful and not ask too much. And now I'm like, no, I'm the person who's like, yeah, I don't like cilantro. I want you to replace the mushrooms with the avocado. And can you add this instead of that? And then can you also make sure that that's super hot? And I want my latte to be in a Togo cup. I don't care. I don't care. We also lose access to something primordial, like that which we originated from. This sense of that we are even connected to something bigger than us, the rhythm of the universe, the beating of the heart of Mother Earth. I think we lose access to that we are nature. We are God. We are so much more. And that we are of the stars. We really are. We're made of stardust. It's true. And when we lose that, we start to become overly identified with the human. And we think everything is about the density of the human, and density meaning like the physical of the human, of the way we do things in the world. And we forget that we are a being. We are a being. being in this world and that we are here to be all that we are. What do you think about that? So the primordial expression of you is lost. It's actually not. It's just dormant. Nothing's lost. Everything's there. That's the coolest part of all of this, is that there's nothing that you are not already. Okay. You are whole. You were born whole. I'm whole. We're all whole. We just got overly identified with the ego structure, with the physical body, with the density of our own being, with the experiences and circumstances of life. We get so overly identified with that that we forget that we're all the other things. And so a lot of this is just about remembering your wholeness, remembering all of who you are. But I don't think it's quite as easy as that because we have really strong ego structures, mental structures that keep us from remembering those things because what we learned was being all of who we are is a risk. It's risking love, acceptance, approval, feeling safe, not getting hurt. So I think that something to journal on is what are you afraid of if you were to be more of yourself? What are some of the things that come to mind when you think about doing this work? When you think about pushing the edges even more than you have been pushing the edges? Because this is one of the things that I've seen. A lot of women who do this work, they'll do a lot of the healing work and they will feel more free inside of themselves than they've ever felt before. They will feel free when they're with certain people who they consider to be safe and welcoming that of them. But when they get with other people, maybe it's their husband or their children or certain friends, they just put it all back into a box and they close it up. And their story in their head is, it's not safe. They're not safe. I'm not safe enough. What I want to invite you to remember is that our safety comes from within. That's where the safety is. Now, do we need to be discerning? Sure. Do we need to expose ourselves to unsafe situations before we're ready? No. Do we sometimes have to have boundaries? Yes. I'm not trying to say you should be reckless with this, but oftentimes we are believing that it is not safe when actually it's just scary. And sometimes we have to take some risks, and we do have to risk that some people will not like it. They might even reject it. They might even sometimes not be able to stick around. That's rare though. Honestly, I really have not seen that much. I usually see that the person does have some discomfort with it, and maybe there's a way that it takes time to recalibrate. I mean, I'm talking about months, sometimes even years to recalibrate, but if we're patient with people, I think they feel it too. There's like a hunger for this, I think, across the board, but it's also scary. I think that my invitation would be to imagine what it would be like to bring in more of this Kali energy. What is it that I want to let go of? And then what do I want to create? Realize that you probably can trust your instincts way more than you think you can, really. And imagine what would it be like to bring in a little bit of some of this feminine energy balancing with that masculine energy so that you could feel what it feels like to be just a little more whole. Wholeness doesn't happen overnight, or the remembrance of wholeness doesn't happen overnight. But when you start to get a little dose of what it feels like to not be so boxed in and to take a breath into that expansiveness, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just for a blip in time, you start to say, oh, I want more of that. And you start to actually notice and become aware of that. The feeling of being constricted is actually terribly uncomfortable. And the feeling of being expansive feels better. The challenge is, are you going to have enough courage to walk through those steps to get from the discomfort of the ego constriction to the expansiveness of the soul? But it does require you to take some steps to get there. So is the comfort of the familiar ego structure keeping you locked in, and you are afraid to take those brave steps to go somewhere else that's a little bit more uncertain and unknown. I think that's a very big balancing act that we have in life of how do we reach beyond the comfort zone, the familiar zone that is actually oftentimes terribly uncomfortable and we're suffering in, so that we can go somewhere else in our lives. How can we be brave enough to do that? I think sometimes we just have to start by just saying, I want to. I really want to. So, Clarissa Pinkola Estés, as I shared with you before, she says when women reassert their relationship with the wildish nature, they're gifted with a permanent and internal watcher, a knower, a visionary, an oracle, an inspiratus, an intuitive, a maker, a creator, an inventor, and a listener who guide, suggest, and urge vibrant life in the inner and outer worlds. I think that's what we're talking about here. A little bit of this reassertion, a reclaiming. Maybe the question isn't how do I control my wild parts? Maybe the question is what becomes possible when I trust myself enough to let myself out of this box I've been put in. Because remember about Kali, she's not just the destroyer of demons, she's the destroyer of illusions. And maybe the biggest illusion that we have been living under is that we need to be tamed in order to be trusted. Even that we need to be tamed in order to be loved and accepted. I want you to remember that you are all of this. You are everything that we've been talking about here today. So the invitation is there for you. The invitation is there. Speaking of invitation, here's how I'd like to end today. I guess first I'd like to end this teaching with a breath. A nice, long, slow, deep breath in. And a long, slow, spacious exhale out. Maybe even take a moment to put your hand on your heart. Possibly welcome more of yourself to come to your awareness. Who am I in my biggest, most expansive self? Who have I cut off from? Who am I ready to meet? And this, my friends, is something you may have heard before by Oriah from Mountain Dreaming. She wrote this in the book, The Invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, or if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed from fear or further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with the wildness and let ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being a human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Take a breath on that one. It's pretty huge. I love that. I remember when I first heard it years ago, though, there was some part of me that had a hard time really taking that in. It just seemed too much for me. I still was identified with my roles, I was identified with titles. I was still hiding behind the title of that I was a mother and a wife and a consultant and whatever other things that I had. I still felt that there were things that I needed to have some structure around to define who I was. And it's taken time to get to the place where I'm comfortable with being less pinnable, more unpredictable, and to trust and to live more and more aligned with what Oriah says in her invitation. So I will leave you with this question. What about you? What about you? Who are you? Who are you becoming? Who are you ready to let go of? What do you want in this one wild life that you're living? What do you want more of? What are you ready to let go of? What risks are you willing to take? And I'm not asking you to take big risks. I want you to look at the tiniest little risk you can take right now to be more you, to reveal more of yourself, to show up more fully. It doesn't have to be big. What's the tiniest one? And then go do that.